The factory floor in Rogers, Arkansas stretches across 15 acres of concrete and steel, a cathedral of American manufacturing where the sound of compressed air and stamping metal creates a rhythm that has persisted for more than a century. In this building, machines produce 15,000 BB guns every single day, each one bearing the name that defined childhood for generations of American boys. Daisy. The name appears stamped into metal and wood, a promise written in serif font that speaks to simpler times, to backyards and tin cans, to the mythology of rural boyhood that existed more in imagination than in reality. But the story of how this empire was built, how it dominated an entire category of American consumer goods, and what it required to maintain that dominance, is darker and more complex than the nostalgic image the company projected for more than 100 years. Plymouth, Michigan, 1882. A man named Clarence Hamilton stands in a small workshop examining a peculiar device that has nothing to do with guns. It is a windmill, a miniature version designed for farmers who need to pump water from wells without the expense of steam engines or the labor of hand cranks. Hamilton runs the Plymouth Iron Windmill Company, and business is struggling. The windmill market is saturated with competitors, and his product, while functional, cannot differentiate itself in a crowded field where price is the only meaningful variable. He needs something else, something to give away for free that will make farmers choose his windmill over the dozens of others available. He needs a premium, an incentive, something with perceived value that costs almost nothing to produce. That is when Lewis Cass Hough walks into his life. Hough is an inventor, a tinkerer, a man who understands mechanics and has been working on a device that uses compressed air to propel small metal projectiles. It is a toy essentially, but engineered with precision that elevates it beyond the wooden pop guns and rubber slingshots that children play with. Hough has created a working air rifle, small enough to be practical, accurate enough to be satisfying, cheap enough to manufacture in quantity. He shows Hamilton a prototype, and Hamilton immediately recognizes what he is looking at. This is not a windmill premium. This is a product that can stand on its own, that can create an entirely new market, that can make them both wealthy if they execute correctly. Hamilton agrees to fund production under one condition: the air rifle must be improved, refined, made into something that will not break after a week of use by a 10-year-old boy. Hough returns to his workshop and emerges months later with a design that uses a coiled spring to compress air, a barrel rifled for accuracy, and a loading mechanism simple enough for a child to operate. Hamilton tests it, firing steel shot at a wooden board from 15 feet, and when he sees the tight grouping of impacts, he knows they have something that will sell. But they need a name, something memorable, something that captures the lightness and pleasure of shooting without suggesting danger or violence. Hamilton's wife sees the prototype and, according to company legend, says it is a daisy, meaning something delightful and charming. The name sticks. The Daisy air rifle goes into production in 1886, sold not as a premium but as a standalone product, marketed directly to parents who want to give their sons a taste of frontier manhood without the danger of actual firearms. The price is set at $1, affordable for middle-class families, aspirational for working-class ones. The marketing emphasizes safety, accuracy, and the educational value of teaching boys to shoot, framing the product as a tool for character development rather than a toy. Orders arrive faster than Hamilton can fill them. Within 2 years, the windmill business is discontinued entirely. The company is renamed Daisy Manufacturing Company, and Hamilton commits all resources to producing air rifles in ever-increasing quantities. By 1890, Daisy is producing more than 30,000 air rifles per year, each one assembled by hand in a factory that employs 70 workers. The rifles are shipped by rail to distributors across the Midwest, then sold through hardware stores, general stores, and mail-order catalogs. The company has no serious competition because Hough's design is protected by patent, and Hamilton aggressively defends those patents against anyone attempting to copy the mechanism. This monopoly allows Daisy to set prices, control distribution, and build a brand identity that becomes synonymous with the product category itself. An air rifle is a daisy, just as a tissue is a Kleenex. The company does not just dominate the market, it creates and defines it. But maintaining that dominance requires constant innovation, not because competitors threaten, but because customers demand novelty. Every few years, Daisy releases a new model with incremental improvements: a stronger spring for greater velocity, a longer barrel for better accuracy, a lever action mechanism that makes loading faster. Each iteration is marketed as a breakthrough, a revolutionary advancement, when in fact the changes are marginal. The strategy works because it keeps the Daisy name in front of consumers, reminds parents every Christmas that their sons need the latest model, creates a culture of upgrading that generates repeat purchases from the same families across multiple generations. Clarence Hamilton dies in 1902, leaving the company to his heirs, who lack his vision and business acumen. The company begins to drift, losing market share to new competitors who have found ways to design around Daisy's patents. Sales decline, profitability erodes, and by 1908, the company is in serious financial trouble. That is when Edward C. Hough, the son of inventor Lewis Cass Hough, takes control. He immediately recognizes that the company has become complacent, relying on brand recognition rather than product superiority. He reorganizes manufacturing, cuts costs, and most importantly, invests in new designs that restore Daisy's reputation for innovation. One of those designs, the Daisy Model 25, becomes the best-selling BB gun in American history, a weapon so iconic that it remains in production more than a century later. The Model 25 is ingenious in its simplicity. It uses a lever action mechanism inspired by Winchester rifles, giving young boys the experience of operating a real firearm without the danger or expense. The rifled steel barrel provides accuracy that far exceeds any competitor's product. The spring-driven power plant generates enough velocity to penetrate tin cans and cardboard at close range, making it satisfying to shoot without being powerful enough to cause serious injury. And the price, initially set at $2.50, positions it as a premium product that parents will buy as a special gift rather than an impulse purchase. The Model 25 launches in 1914, and within a year, Daisy is back to full production capacity, running 3 shifts to meet demand. But 1914 is also the year World War I begins in Europe, and while the United States does not enter the conflict until 1917, the war creates economic disruptions that affect American manufacturing. Steel becomes expensive and difficult to obtain. Labor shortages develop as men enlist or are drafted. Daisy survives by adapting, by finding alternative materials, by automating processes that previously required skilled workers. The company also benefits from a surge in patriotic sentiment that increases demand for products associated with American masculinity and self-reliance. A boy with a Daisy is a boy preparing to defend his country, or so the marketing suggests. Sales during the war years actually increase despite the economic challenges because the cultural moment aligns perfectly with the product's identity. After the war, the 1920s bring prosperity and expansion. Daisy opens new factories, increases production, and begins exporting to foreign markets. The company also diversifies, producing not just air rifles but also air pistols, targets, ammunition, and accessories. The BB, a small steel sphere 4.5 millimeters in diameter, becomes a product category unto itself, with Daisy manufacturing millions of them daily to supply the growing installed base of air rifles in American homes. The business model is brilliant in its sustainability. Sell a durable rifle once, then sell consumable ammunition forever. It is the razor and blade strategy applied to toys, and it generates steady revenue that survives economic downturns because parents will always buy more BBs for the rifle they already own. The Great Depression hits in 1929, and Daisy, like every American manufacturer, faces catastrophic declines in sales. Families cannot afford luxuries, and a BB gun, no matter how well it is marketed, is a luxury. The company survives by slashing prices, reducing wages, and laying off workers, but also by doubling down on the marketing narrative that positions the Daisy as an investment in a boy's future. During hard times, the company argues, it is more important than ever to teach sons the values of discipline, patience, and self-reliance that shooting provides. The message resonates just enough to keep the company afloat, though profits disappear and the workforce shrinks by more than half. World War II brings a different kind of challenge. The government restricts steel production for consumer goods, directing all available material to military manufacturing. Daisy's factories are converted to produce parts for actual firearms, for machine guns and rifles used by American troops overseas. The company does not produce air rifles between 1942 and 1945, and the workforce, now including women who have replaced men drafted into military service, learns new skills and operates new machinery. When the war ends and production resumes, Daisy is a different company, more modern, more efficient, more capable of mass production at scales that would have been impossible before the war. The post-war boom is extraordinary. Millions of American families move to suburbs, buy houses, have children, and embrace a vision of domestic life that includes backyards, barbecues, and boys shooting BB guns at makeshift targets. Daisy becomes the default gift for every boy's 10th birthday, a rite of passage as culturally significant as getting a bicycle or learning to drive. The company cannot produce rifles fast enough. Factories run 24 hours a day. The workforce expands to more than 1,000 employees. Distribution networks extend into every corner of the country. The Daisy Red Ryder, introduced in 1940, becomes the most iconic version. Marketed in partnership with the Red Ryder comic strip and positioned as the ultimate cowboy toy for the post-war generation obsessed with westerns. But beneath this success, fractures are forming that will eventually threaten the empire. The first fracture is competition. By the 1950s, dozens of companies are producing air rifles, many of them importing cheap models from Japan and Europe that undercut Daisy's prices. The company responds by emphasizing quality and heritage, by positioning itself as the authentic American brand. But the strategy has limits. Working-class families who represent the majority of Daisy's customer base are price-sensitive, and a $5 imported rifle that breaks after a year is more appealing than a $15 Daisy that lasts 10 years when the family cannot afford $15. The second fracture is cultural. The 1960s bring profound changes to American society, including a growing skepticism toward guns of all types. The assassinations of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. sparked national debates about firearms and violence. While BB guns are not part of these debates, the general cultural shift creates an environment where parents become more cautious about giving their sons anything that resembles a weapon. Daisy tries to adapt by introducing less realistic-looking products, by emphasizing sport shooting and marksmanship rather than frontier mythology, but the effort feels forced and unconvincing. The brand's identity is inseparable from guns, and guns are becoming culturally problematic in ways that no marketing campaign can overcome. The third fracture is economic. Manufacturing in America is becoming more expensive as labor unions gain power and wages rise. Daisy's workforce is unionized by the 1960s, and while the company negotiates in good faith, the higher labor costs make it difficult to compete with imports produced by non-union workers earning a fraction of American wages. The company begins moving production to lower-cost facilities, closing the original Plymouth factory and consolidating operations in Rogers, Arkansas, where labor is cheaper and unions are weaker. The move is presented as a rational business decision, and perhaps it is, but it also represents a betrayal of the Michigan workers who built the company, who gave decades of their lives to producing a product they believed in, and who are now discarded because their labor has become too expensive. The fourth fracture is generational. By the 1970s, American boys are growing up with television, video games, and a suburban landscape that offers fewer opportunities for the kind of outdoor play that Daisy's products require. A BB gun is useless without space to shoot it safely, and suburban backyards are too small, too close to neighbors, too regulated by homeowners associations that prohibit discharging any kind of projectile weapon. The cultural moment that created Daisy's success, the post-war suburban expansion that emphasized outdoor recreation and self-reliant boyhood, is ending, replaced by a more indoor, more supervised, more risk-averse vision of childhood. The company tries to adapt by marketing to rural customers, to families with land and space and a continued attachment to hunting and shooting culture, but this is a shrinking demographic that cannot sustain the growth the company needs to remain profitable. The 1980s bring further decline. The company changes ownership multiple times, bought and sold by investors who see it as an asset to be extracted rather than a brand to be nurtured. Each new owner promises to revitalize the company, to invest in new products and new markets, but the investments never materialize. Instead, the focus is on cost-cutting, on squeezing more profit from a declining business, on extending the life of the brand just long enough to sell it to the next buyer. The workforce shrinks, the factories deteriorate, the product line stagnates. The Daisy name, once synonymous with quality and innovation, becomes associated with cheapness and nostalgia, a relic from a bygone era that parents buy not because their sons want it, but because they remember wanting it themselves. Yet through all of this decline, the Rogers factory continues to operate, continues to produce 15,000 BB guns every single day, continues to employ hundreds of workers who depend on those jobs to support their families. The work is monotonous and physically demanding. Stamping metal, assembling components, testing finished rifles, packing them into boxes for shipment. The wages are low, barely above minimum wage, with minimal benefits and no job security. The workers know the company is dying, know that their jobs could disappear at any moment, but they show up every day because they have no better options. Because Rogers is a small town with limited employment opportunities. Because a low-wage job at Daisy is better than no job at all. The factory itself is a museum of American industrial decline. The original equipment from the early 20th century still operates, maintained and repaired by workers who learned the machinery from workers who are now retired or dead. The building is poorly maintained, with leaking roofs and inadequate heating and ventilation systems that make the work environment uncomfortable and sometimes dangerous. The company does not invest in improvements because any investment would be wasted on a dying business. The goal is not to build for the future, but to extract maximum value from the present, to keep the machines running just long enough to recoup the cost of the latest acquisition, then sell to the next buyer and let them worry about what comes after. The workers understand this dynamic, understand that they are disposable, that their labor is valued only to the extent that it generates profit for distant owners who will never visit the factory floor, who will never see the conditions they work in, or hear the noise, or breathe the metal dust that fills the air. Some workers have been there for decades, have given their entire working lives to producing a product that shaped American culture, but they receive no recognition for this contribution, no acknowledgement that their labor made the company possible. They are simply line items on a balance sheet, costs to be minimized, obstacles to profitability that must be managed and eventually eliminated. In the early 2000s, the company is purchased by Gamo, a Spanish airgun manufacturer, which promises to modernize operations and expand the product line. Some improvements are made, new models are introduced, the website is updated, but the fundamental problems remain unaddressed. The market for BB guns continues to shrink. Competition from cheaper imports continues to intensify. The cultural forces that once made Daisy an essential part of American boyhood continue to weaken. The company survives not because it thrives, but because it has become too small to fail, because shutting down the factory would cost more than keeping it running at minimal capacity, because the Daisy name still has just enough brand value to generate revenue even if profit margins are razor thin. The workers know the company is operating on borrowed time, know that the factory could close at any moment, but they also know they have no power to change the situation. They cannot demand better wages because the company claims it cannot afford them. They cannot demand better working conditions because the company claims it cannot afford improvements. They cannot demand job security because the company openly admits it cannot guarantee the factory's future. They are trapped in a system that extracts their labor while offering nothing in return except a paycheck that barely covers basic expenses and the constant anxiety that comes from knowing that paycheck could disappear without warning. This is the reality behind the nostalgic image that Daisy continues to project in its marketing. The advertisements still show boys in backyards, still evoke frontier mythology and simpler times, still promise that a Daisy BB gun will teach discipline and responsibility and self-reliance. But the company producing those guns is not the innovative American manufacturer of popular imagination. It is a hollowed-out shell, kept alive through cost-cutting and exploitation, sustained by workers who have no better options and customers who buy out of nostalgia rather than genuine need or desire. The empire that Clarence Hamilton and Lewis Cass Hough built in 1886 still exists, but only in the most technical sense. The factory still operates, the name still appears on products, the brand still has recognition, but the substance is gone, replaced by a business model that prioritizes extraction over creation, that treats workers as costs rather than assets, that survives not by serving customers, but by exploiting the residual cultural power of a name that once meant something. The question of what Daisy represents in American history is complicated. On one hand, it is a story of innovation and entrepreneurship, of immigrants and inventors building something from nothing, of a company that survived depressions and wars and massive cultural shifts to remain in business for more than a century. It is a story that reinforces comforting narratives about American ingenuity and resilience, about the power of free markets to create and sustain businesses that serve consumers and employ workers. This is the story the company tells about itself, the story that appears in official histories and anniversary celebrations. But on the other hand, it is also a story of exploitation and decline, of workers betrayed by owners who chose profits over people, of a brand that survived only by abandoning the workers who built it, of a factory that operates not to serve any meaningful purpose, but simply because shutting it down would be too expensive and too damaging to the brand. This is the story that is rarely told, the story that makes people uncomfortable because it contradicts the mythology of American manufacturing and American capitalism more broadly. It is a story about what happens when a company outlives its cultural moment, when it continues to exist not because it serves any genuine need, but because it has become embedded in systems of finance and labor that make its elimination difficult and complicated. The workers at the Rogers factory live this contradiction every day. They produce a product that many people see as wholesome and nostalgic, that evokes childhood and simpler times, that appears in Christmas movies and hangs on the walls of bars decorated with Americana memorabilia. But they know the reality behind the image. They know the working conditions are poor, the wages are inadequate, the future is uncertain. They know they are producing nostalgia, literally manufacturing the material embodiment of a cultural fantasy about American boyhood that never existed in the form it is remembered. They know the BB guns they produce will be bought by adults seeking connection to an imagined past rather than by boys who actually want to shoot targets in their backyards. Because those boys are inside playing video games or watching videos on their phones, engaging with forms of entertainment that have replaced the outdoor recreation that BB guns require. This displacement of the cultural moment that created Daisy's success is perhaps the most profound aspect of the company's decline. The product has not changed significantly in a century. The Model 25, introduced in 1914, is still in production, still functions exactly the same way, still provides the same experience to anyone who uses it. What has changed is the world around it. The suburban backyards are smaller or non-existent. The tolerance for unsupervised outdoor play has evaporated. The cultural narratives that position shooting as character building have been challenged and complicated. The assumption that all boys want to shoot guns, even toy guns, has been questioned and rejected. The Daisy BB gun has become a historical artifact, a relic from a cultural moment that has passed, kept in production not because it serves any contemporary need, but because it continues to generate just enough revenue to justify the factory's existence. The workers understand this better than anyone. They see the declining order volumes, see the warehouse filling with unsold inventory, see the management meetings where executives discuss cuts and consolidations. They hear the rumors about potential closures, about moving production overseas, about selling the brand to another company that will gut it for parts. They know their jobs exist in a liminal space, neither fully alive nor fully dead, sustained by inertia and nostalgia and the reluctance of ownership to make a final decision about the factory's future. They show up every day and perform their tasks, with the knowledge that each shift could be the last, that the announcement could come at any time, that their labor is valued only until it becomes more expensive to continue than to terminate. If there is any lesson in Daisy's history, it is perhaps this, that capitalism is indifferent to culture, to heritage, to the workers who sustain production, to anything except the generation of profit. The company survived for as long as it generated acceptable returns, and it will continue to survive only as long as that condition holds. When the mathematics of profit and loss tip too far in the wrong direction, when the cost of maintaining the factory exceeds the revenue it generates, when the brand value has been extracted to its final drop, the company will close. The factory will be shuttered, the equipment sold for scrap, the workers laid off to find employment elsewhere if they can. The name may survive, licensed to some other company producing cheap imports, stamped with the Daisy logo, but the substance will be gone, the connection to the original company severed, the history reduced to a marketing asset with no operational significance. The Rogers factory continues to run, continues to produce 15,000 BB guns every single day, continues to employ workers who understand they are participating in something that is ending, that has perhaps already ended and simply has not stopped moving yet. The sound of compressed air and stamping metal fills the building, a rhythm that has persisted for more than a century, that will persist until the day it stops. Until the machines fall silent and the workers go home and the factory becomes another abandoned industrial building in a small American town, another monument to a vanished era of manufacturing, another reminder that nothing built by human hands is permanent, that all empires decline, that all dynasties end, that all that remains are the stories we tell about what existed before it disappeared.